In my last video, we talked about how brutal the PC specs are. So now the real question is, can something like an 8GB RTX 5060 laptop actually play this game well? So this is 1440p high settings with DLSS on quality, and honestly, this is actually much better than what I expected. For the most part, it stays around 60 FPS. Whether you're walking through the city, moving around in the forest, climbing cliffs, or even riding the horse. Yeah, and about that riding part, when you're riding really fast, there is a decent amount of pop in, but that should not distract so much, as once you get immersed into the game, you'll forget all of that. Even in fights with multiple enemies, it mostly holds in the low 60s and can even go a bit higher, but sometimes you can get a few stutters here and there. It's not constant, but it does show up when things get more intense. And this actually feels more like a CPU limitation in those moments rather than the GPU struggling. Now, just out of curiosity, I also tried pushing it a bit further. So this is 4K high settings with DLSS on performance, and honestly, it looks incredible. And it's not just the higher resolution. In this game, you can actually see a noticeable jump in detail. Things just look sharper and more stable, especially in motion. Performance wise, it sits mostly in the mid 40s to the low 50s, which is actually still very playable for a single player game like this. This kind of feels like the 40 FPS mode on something like the PS5 Pro. Not quite 60ish, but smooth enough to enjoy. But yeah, this is more of a stretch. 1440p is still definitely where this hardware makes the most sense. And honestly, most of these 8GB laptop GPUs like the 4060, 4070, 5060 and the 5070 already come with 1600p displays. So they're kind of meant to be used above 1080p anyways. 1080p still works great because initially I booted the game, it chose 1080p ultra settings native and it was still mostly 60 FPS. But once you try 1440p, 1080p feels more like a fallback rather than the main target. And this is on high settings with DLSS quality, so this is a pretty realistic setup for most people using this kind of laptop. I'm running 32GB of RAM here, which might help a bit with consistency, but overall this is mostly on the GPU side. And the power limit on the GPU is 115 watts on boost. So laptops that are faster and push higher than 5060 will still see better results. And what's interesting is, this is pretty much exactly where I expected it to land. In my earlier video, I had the 5060 in the upper mid tier where 1440p with DLSS should be doable, and that's basically what we are seeing here, especially with how these GPUs are a bit limited on memory bandwidth. So when we saw the PC specs earlier, it made it look like we'd need really high-end hardware. But this kind of performance shows mid-range laptops can actually handle it pretty well. So overall, if you're on something like the 5060 laptop, yes, you can absolutely play Crimson Desert at 1440p with good settings. Just expect the occasional stutter in heavier moments. I'm also curious what you guys would run this at. Would you stick to 1440p or drop to 1080p for smoother gameplay?